tweet it, Facebook it, tweet it on that account, Google Plus it. Okay, so close, close, close. Okay. Okay, if you can, Brian, can you go load your Audacity, get it prepped and ready? Did you already hit record?
I already hit record on mine.
Okay, do me a favor. When I say the word record, hit Control-M on your keyboard, okay? With Audacity in focus.
Okay.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, record. Okay, that should have a marker now in your audio.
Oh.
So everything at the marker and before, when we're done, delete.
Oh, okay.
Just so we're time synced up. Makes it much easier.
Yes.
In the final broadcast. Okay. Did you see the doc? Okay. You don't have to. Here's my God's honest logic with this. You don't have to give me any link in the doc. You can just worry about talking. I can try to document as much on the fly.
Okay.
That's something I'm going to leave up to you. I have no problem with documenting stuff, and after the fact, if you want, you can come back into the doc and add stuff in if it comes back into your mind, kind of thing. I'm going to encourage you to put in as many links as you can back to sites, services, or things of yours.
Okay.
Just to give people as many options as possible to listen to your stuff. Click on on all the co-hosts, all the hosts of the show, and all of your products and services, kind of thing. Make it easy as pie.
Do my best. Your document.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're right. Okay. Okay, so everything looks good. Okay, good. Well, I can close out of this window then. Close out of that window since the audio stream ain't working. I'm going to kill that developer. Last thing. Forgot to post it in the IRC. Okay, there you go. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Server Show, episode number 15. My name is DoorToDoorGeek, a.k.a. Steve McLaughlin. This episode, we are officially now documented as we are Jeffless. Jeff is, his internet service via Comcast right now is less than 1 megabit download and less than half a megabit upload speed. Chad had basically a emergency happen at his job where he has to work late night, aka that's why he gets paid the big bucks. Josh, I believe, has a family event going on tonight. So this is a server show without Jeff, without Chad, and without Josh, but I honestly believe this is going to be still some of the best information we're going to have in our show, quote-unquote, history, and that's because we have someone on this show that I genuinely listen to now for, I want to say, 5-6 months vehemently. And every time I see an episode come down from this feed, it gets pushed up to the front of my podcast listening because I know whatever topic they're talking about, they're going to talk about it intelligently, but yet having fun. And the guest tonight is Brian Wagner. How's everything going, Brian?
Everything's going well. I really hope I can live up to this hype. That was a heck of an introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad to hear that there's people out there still listening to us after 5 years on Linux install, and actually only about 5 months I've been doing the other podcast, which is DevOps Mastery.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I just became aware of you by stumbling across a posting on Google Plus. When there was, hey, there's this podcast going on, I said, what? I didn't know about this. So I started listening, and I gotta say, I'm a big fan of a couple things. One, you're not tech journalist sitting in your underwear expecting to be treated good. You're literal, working people talking about the stuff that you guys have to go through. That to me is very appealing, and I think you guys do it very well. So really quick for the listeners, can you list off all of your podcasts and where people can find them at?
Sure. The first podcast, and this was the original one that I do with, I have two co-hosts right now. We've rotated a third co-host. Joe Luzzi and I have been doing the podcast religiously since about 2009, and I think somewhere around August 2009, we just passed our 5th year. And I do a second podcast. It just started in April because I didn't want to dominate Linux install with just DevOps stuff. So I started a whole new thing called DevOpsMaster.com. And I'm basically trying to do a boot camp for everybody on what it means to do DevOps, how to do DevOps. I'm actually going to be on a different podcast called Arrested DevOps, if you're really into DevOps. Matt and Trevor do an awesome job over on Arrested DevOps, and you should check out ArrestedDevOps.com also.
That's awesome. Now, here's my question, because typically Linux users come into Linux from one of two major avenues. They're either home, hobbyist, want to get rid of Windows, so they get into the Linux desktop, and then they try to get it into their job kind of thing. Or at work, they have to start with Linux servers, and then it eventually bleeds into they install Linux at home on their desktop. Can I ask which path was your entry point?
I'm going to give you a third path. I started doing Unix in college.
Oh.
And so I was, I really dug Solaris and ended up getting a job supporting Solaris and supporting actually Lotus Notes on Solaris. And the forward-thinking guys that I took over for had also invested some time and created a Slackware box that when I was at FedEx, we were handling. And this is, you got to remember, this is like 1995, 96. We were handling almost 1 million emails a day and about a gigabyte of mail through a T1 connection. Like we were maxing the T1 just in email.
Exactly.
And so my path was kind of that way. I came into it. I have done my time supporting Windows desktops. I actually work for a Windows company now just because I wanted to get back and learn some DevOps stuff from a Windows perspective, because I'm pretty good with the Linux stuff, but I wanted the Windows knowledge. So I pretty much just started in college with Unix and just kept doing it. And I really liked the free part of Linux. I did own a Solaris box at one point, but that was when Sun sold a $1,500 box, which was about the only time in my life I've been able to afford one. And I just started using Linux. I first put it on a Power Mac, and I was running Linux firewalls at home. I live here in Akron, and little known fact is that Time Warner's Roadrunner service started here. So I had 15 megabit internet in like 1995, which every time you tell the Time Warner people that, they're like, no, we didn't have it then. I'm like, yeah, I actually did. and it was pretty good, and it's always been pretty good. It has its issues and its days, but for the most part, it's pretty good. And,
well, I mean, nothing's perfect.
Yeah. So I had firewalls and stuff set up at home, and I started learning how to do stuff like bind, kind of at home, and at the same time I was doing it at work. So I just tended to I kept coming back to Linux, and Linux just seemed to be the way to go. But I've always had to support other flavors of Unix. So I've been more, probably closer to that path where you're talking about, my job required me to do Unix, but I really got started with Unix back in college.
Gotcha. So. I think that's pretty awesome, because that to me means your, I don't want to say competency of Linux is great, but you got to have at least a little bit of a broad knowledge. You can't just know this one thing. I'm thinking you got to know a whole bunch of different stuff. But the question I want to know is, I'm going to guess the flavor of Linux you run in your house as your daily driver isn't Ubuntu. I'm going to guess it's something else.
You would be wrong.
Oh, I tried.
Well, I guess technically you're wrong. Realistically, I'm using Linux Mint because I'm an ex-Mac user too. So I like all the OSs, and so I used to use Mac, and I couldn't justify buying another Mac when I could buy a PC that was way more powerful for way less money. And so when I bought my last PC, I switched over to Linux Mint, and I've been running Mint pretty much since a year and a half now. And I like it. I've also ran Pinguy OS for a while.
Right.
I don't like things about Ubuntu, so I don't run standard Ubuntus because I really don't like the Unity interface.
Well, you're not the only one.
I know.
And because I was thinking a server guy wants, I don't want to say complexity, but they want utter ridiculous down and deep control. But running Linux Mint tells me then you're in the same camp I'm in right now, which is I just want this computer here at home to just work with as little issue as possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things when you're doing this for a job and you have to manage Linux machines all day, you get all the time in the world at work to figure out how to break and fix stuff that when you get home, you just want it to work.
Right.
And that's not to say I don't have a bunch of, I mean, I have a bunch of CentOS servers running, I have an ESX server running, I have a bunch of virtual machines running all the time with all different flavors of Unix. I am partial to the Debian package system because I've used both it and RPMs, and I got attracted to the Debian apt-get system before Yum really was as good as it is now. Yum now is pretty much on par.
Yeah, it's grown a lot. Now, the thing is, I could literally, I think, have you on this show 10 episodes in a row, and every show we could go into something else. But with this episode here, what I wanted to talk about, and you hinted about it, is DevOps. Can I ask for a quick definition to the layman of what DevOps means or what it is?
Sure, I definitely can give you that. DevOps, in its simplest form, is trying to get operations people and developers to work together to solve problems and to break down the silos between the two departments. That's the core of it. And then from there, you do a lot of things in the DevOps discussion. Once you've got everybody talking, then you start doing things like continuous integration, which is basically developer inputs code into a source control system, and some automated system pulls it out, builds it, runs tests against it, and produces what is supposed to be production ready, assuming that all the tests pass.
Right.
On the other side.
And see, to me, this almost sounds like a Liger unicorn hybrid. I mean, this sounds almost magical to me to have this kind of, I don't want to say simplicity because it's really utter complexity, but just working mentality of just you put stuff in the front door, everything in the middle gets done magically, I'll say. And then at the end, you have production code that you can also automatically deploy if you want to, I'm guessing, dev or test or QA or production.
Sure. Let's talk about some of the unicorns, as the even DevOps community calls them. The Googles, the Etsy's, the Facebooks, the Netflixes. They really do have that level of automation. Now, they've worked really hard at it, and it's not an overnight thing. You can't just wake up one morning and decide to do the DevOps, or even do one project to do the DevOps, which is funny because that's what a lot of companies try to hire consultants to tell them, tell us how to do the DevOps thing. And DevOps is a lot about culture, and it's a lot more about culture, really. Once you have the culture worked out, getting through that automation, you take it in small chunks and you just work your way through it. One of the companies that I worked at for about 6 years, when we started, we had no automation. By the time I left, they had everything, for at least the web applications, almost completely automated. So that before we started the last round of automation, the first round of automation that we did, though, and we did it in multiple rounds, but the first round just basically got applications installed and the servers out. And that was great because it took an install from 5 days to 5 or 6 hours, maybe 8 hours, if it was a really complex application, because there were still some things we had to do manually. When we did one of the upgrades, I had finally convinced enough management that we should spend the time to do the automation right the second time, fix all the things that we learned, because we learned a ton of what we needed to do. And we just took that learning, applied it to what we were doing. I actually sucked one of the developers off the development team over to my ops team to make sure that we followed good development practices, source code control. He wasn't a big TDD person, so we didn't do a lot of testing. we did testing, but we didn't do a lot of automated testing, and that was kind of our next phase that we were going to do for phase 3, was to start automating the testing so that even the testing of our scripts were done. And by the time we got done, we would take a virtual machine template from VMware with just a base OS on it, start 2 or 3 scripts, and it would fire everything off. And it would install WebSphere, it would install all the MQ series stuff that we needed, any other drivers that we needed, and basically get the whole thing up and running in. I think we had it down to about 30 minutes total, from bare metal to completely set up. And
gotcha.
And so we got it so fast, actually, that when we did our next DR drill, we had to do a DR drill every year. When we did our next DR drill, we were allotted 48 hours. We were done in 4.
So you had pizza and Mountain Dew for the rest of the time.
We spent most of our time waiting for the mainframe to restore, because they were doing a special test. They were actually trying to restore from tapes to make sure their tapes were working. So we were sitting there waiting for them for most of the drill. Because we couldn't do anything until they were up.
That's awesome. And I don't want to say it like meanly, but it's great when you have to wait on someone else doesn't have to wait on you.
Uh-huh.
You know.
And it wasn't like I was waiting on them to physically do things. I mean, there was just a physical thing. Tape media only reads so fast.
Right.
And
yeah.
So, yeah.
And now, if I had a complete, utter, ridiculous noob to enterprise, the way I would explain DevOps to them is, okay, you know how you can do batch scripts to do a task and then another task and then another task? I would think DevOps, to explain it to them, it's like that, except incredibly deeper and broader.
Well, it's deeper and it's broader, and there has to be a level of communications and inner workings between teams. You can't be siloed. Siloed is the death of DevOps. It can't work if you can't communicate.
Okay.
And communicate doesn't mean dumping on people. Communicate means working collaboratively and talking to each other. You know.
Okay. Well, here's my question. Okay, we have our system in place of what is essentially, I'm going to say in the Linux world, it's a bunch of scripts, because everything in Linux is clear text, so it's scripts. Where you get this code from a developer, you push it through this automated or semi-automated system to where you get punched out either compiled code or you get a completed code project. Where does the operation side or the business side come into the idea of cooperation and communications?
In the communications, the business side comes from clearly stating what the goals of the organization are. One of the problems that a lot of us that are trying to talk about DevOps have seen repeatedly is the people on the ground doing the work, the developers and the operations staff, whether that's DBAs or OS level, all just know that there's some piece of code that has to go on some website somewhere. And they don't really know why. They don't really care, because I have to do my job and I have to move my widget from point A to point B, and how I get there is up to me, and as long as it all works, everybody's happy. The business comes in and trying to set everybody and make everybody aligned to understand what the important features are for this product. Why is it important to do this? Because that then helps you as an implementer understand, well, this part's really critical. So if it's a rating system, well, that's going to be really critical to this product. So we need to make sure we have as much redundancy around that as possible. So when we start to deploy new automation around or new load balancing or something like that, we should probably start with that, because that's the most critical. So that's where the business comes in. They help you set the criticality of the different pieces and tell you what you should be focused on, because that's what they need to do their job, which is why you're all there.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, and I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess something here, because I'm not incredibly attuned to the flow of real business. I'll say in quotes, because I'm a government employee. But I'm going to guess the business and the operations unit also have to be involved, because they have to have input into the business logic, I'll say, of the application, but also I'm going to guess they have something to do with the acceptance testing or the unit testing of it. And here's the other logic thing that I keep thinking in my head. Part of the payoff, part of the buy-off from them into this is, look, your steps, your processes can be done in, a much quicker time frame, but we have to have not only money buy-in from you guys, but we have to have teamwork, communication, in this entire process.
Yes. And from an operations perspective, you also need input from and to the developers so that you can know what's coming, right? If they're going to want to deploy some new service, they've decided they don't want to do relational databases anymore, they want to do NoSQL databases, well, that's a whole different way of scaling, that's a whole different way of deploying, you have to think differently, so people need some time to wrap up on the operations side to make sure that those things are stable and production ready. And the developers can't just build stuff and throw it over the wall. That's a huge problem in most large enterprises. Is the developers are like, well, I just developed the code and I give it to you, and it's your problem.
Right.
And so there isn't a lot of feedback loop there too. And ops people can very often. There's a lot of people on both sides that make assumptions about the way the other side thinks.
Yeah.
So operations will think that developers want one thing, when if they had actually asked them, the developers would say, no, we want this actually easier path. We know that's hard. We don't want you to have to work that hard. We want to do this simpler path because it's simpler for us too, usually. So
yeah,
it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and part of me thinks with the emergence of IT back in the day, I think of this almost as like a code repository kind of thing. When IT first started, there was essentially a fork in everything where the IT people do this, the business people do that, and they were very clearly segregated. And when time went on, that chasm of separation became very great to where the communication was almost not expected to happen. And this DevOps, to me, is a starting of the merging of the code base, let's say, back to, okay, now we're working together, we're one seamless unit. We all have our individual tasks to do, and what we have to do is we have to organize mechanisms, mechanics, processes, scripts to enable us all to work together. Now, you mentioned web, so here's my question. Does this process, I'm going to call it a process even though I'm not sure if that's what DevOps is, does this process rely on or work better with web type applications, client server type applications, mainframe type applications, mobile applications, distributed applications, cloud applications? Is there any one niche you think DevOps is more geared towards, or do you think this can be put towards almost any kind of development in a environment?
Oh no, it can go into any type of development environment, but I think it extends beyond development. So the big focus that you'll hear most people talking about, because it's the simplest to explain and it's the simplest to show, is web apps. And it's usually the easiest to implement in those situations because there's a huge tool set there for doing that. Now, the exception to that might be the mainframe. There's tons of testing tools and other stuff, and we've been doing mainframe programming for so long. There's ways to do all of this stuff on the mainframe too, so I'm not going to discount that. But standalone applications and mobile applications, especially mobile applications, I think people forget that mobile applications are only, 4 years old?
Yeah.
Maybe? It's a really new technology, especially when you think about the fact that web apps have really been around since about 92, 93, so they're actually not that old either. They're only about 11 years old. And one of the things that I think a lot of the people in DevOps have learned from is to look at the mainframe, because the mainframe is the old gray guy in the back, the old gray bear in the back.
Exactly.
And it's been doing everything with really good redundancy and all this other stuff forever. The original virtual machines were the IBM mainframe.
Right.
And that whole system was virtualized. So they've always had this ability, and it's been laughing at the x86 type machines or class machines, because they didn't have that until we started deploying VMware and clouds and all that happy stuff. So it's just easier to describe, but I try to push people to do things. There may not be a developer, but we do a lot of Windows XP to either 7 or 8 migrations where I work.
Right.
And we use the same DevOps thought process, talk to the business, make sure that we understand what the business's goal is with the upgrade, make sure that we're automating everything we can. And so our guys, when we go to do a rollout, and let's say we have, we tend to work with really large hospital systems, so there'll be 18,000 computers we have to do. Our core team from our company will go in, configure all of the automation so that everything can be done in a completely automated manner. We will kick it off, test it, make sure that it all works, try to come up with as many different bugs as we can find. Our packaging team will package up all the applications that the company uses, and we'll deploy those. And we'll make sure all of that stuff's working so that we can pull in less experienced people and have them be as effective as those of us that are senior. So those of us that know how this is going to break when it breaks, we'll bring in either just less experienced people or younger people. We have a whole group of people we call the university, which is 6 or 7 every year, college grads that we bring in to train up and bring up to speed. But they have to start somewhere, so start them with the stuff that's already automated so that they can see how cool it can be.
Right.
Which has a lot less effect on them because they didn't have to suffer through the pain of actually doing it manually. But but they believe us when we tell them.
See, that's cool. When I first got into the computer IT building at my job, I thought mainframe was the crazy gray-bearded guy in the corner who would once in a while stand up and say, COBOL! Stuff was so much better when we did it in COBOL! That kind of stuff. But what I didn't know, well, they are still saying that. But what I didn't know, and I found this out a couple years ago, my place of work, the mainframe has not had unplanned downtime in 25 years. That's more than half of my life. When they expected this thing to be up, it had 100% uptime when they thought it was going to be up. And that's remarkably insane. And then I started learning about the chain of tools that they used and how stuff got passed through their system for acceptance and approval and code validation and stuff, and then how they had governors on the system. And then it started to make a lot of sense. And then you saying you can basically take this exact same methodology, practice, process, and put it towards OS upgrades. That just really, to me, made a lot more stuff clear. Okay, what I'm going to ask now is, I think, an easy question. There's no such thing as a normal DevOps chain. Okay, so I'm just going to punch myself in the face from that. Okay, in your typical DevOps chain process flowchart tree environment that you make up, I'm gonna guess half of the work is in the scripting process. Now, like a third of the work is in the scripting process. A third of the work is in figuring out which tool to use, what switches to use in your script, whether it be, I don't know, anything from wget, curl, CP, SSH, rsync. I mean, all kinds of different things you can take advantage of. And then a third of it is just error trapping and making sure you're checking for the right thing during the process.
That's one way to describe it, and that's pretty accurate. You're thinking that I guess you're just not aware of the fact that there's a huge set of tools now that have come up around handling some of that stuff. Like, I rarely do a wget or a curl anymore because the tools that I use, whether that's Chef or Ansible or Puppet, all have the ability behind the scenes to run curl for me. And I just have to say, go get this file from this HTTP server, or Samba share or wherever it is, NTFS share, NFS, any SharePoint that I can go pull from, any place where the file could be shared from, I can set that up and say, okay, here tool, go do this, go get it. And that's not to leave out Windows. The SCCM stuff can do that too. The tools have all kind of matured, and that's where it started. It started with doing those very simple scripts. Now there's entire tools to handle and abstract that away. One of the big problems that you have, especially in an environment where you have multiple versions of Linux, is you may have Ubuntu machines because this software runs better on Ubuntu. You might have another set of machines that are Red Hat because this other software runs better on Red Hat or it's better supported by Red Hat. So you've got all these different package managers and slightly different locations for files. And so these tools like Chef and Puppet and SaltStack and Ansible all abstract that away. You just say, I need Apache installed. I need MySQL installed. I need this configuration file put into the Apache directory in the right spot, and let it go, and it does it. So
gotcha. Yeah, I've heard
it's
of
a little bit easier than that, but than what you just got.
Yeah, I've heard of Puppet and Chef and Salt. I'm going to group those three together because I'm really not completely aware of what they do. What I gather is they are environment maintaining tools where you can have groups and clusters in a single environment and they're all synced across with each other, so they all have the same software version, they all have the same configuration version, they all have the same files distributed to them in a seamless fashion.
Yes, they actually call them configuration management tools. Okay. And they're managing the configuration so the configuration is consistent. If you're not using a centralized repository like Active Directory or LDAP for user IDs, it's very common to use these tools to make sure that your user ID and password are the same, or your user ID and SSH key are the same. When you need to change that because your security says every 180 days you have to change those things, you can just go into this tool, change it there, and then it'll push it out to all the machines for you. And you don't have to worry about those things. So it's there to, yeah, that's exactly how to describe it. It's there to just to handle that. And Ansible is just another one. It's a newer one, just how they execute on it. It doesn't do anything really different. It's just how it's done. It's different. Some are a little simpler, some of them harder.
Okay, well, and here's like I'm like the guy driving down the street, but there's a blind spot where I just can't see, and unfortunately, there's like a deer in front of my way. Okay, this is where I'm afraid that I'm looking at this right now, and that is these tools, these tool sets, the manner in which these tools work, I think really makes sense in the Linux world. In the Windows world, I can't see how you can do the same level of configuration management, mirroring and updating with tools like IIS. I would think that this DevOps process works really easier and quicker in the Linux world versus the Windows world, but something tells me I'm very wrong in thinking that.
Not as wrong as you would hope you were, but no, and this is why I switched. So I get asked a lot, why would a Linux guy go work for one of the top Microsoft bars in the country? And that's who I do work for. We just got
to make money.
A partner thing. Well, part of it's to make money. Part of it was because I started doing they had some Linux work, and I started doing some Linux work for them, and then I just switched over to do my other field of expertise, which is security, information security, security systems, identity management. And they have a huge identity management practice, and that's why I was sticking around. One of the things, though, that I wanted, selfishly, was to learn more about, because these guys are good at automating stuff, and how do you automate that, and how would I repeat or translate what I would do on Linux to what I would do in Windows.
Right.
What I have discovered is, until the advent of the wonderful thing called PowerShell, there really was no way to do everything. You could do parts. You could script some stuff in IIS. You had to do it with VBScript. It was very clunky. It was very hard.
Yeah.
And I could never figure out why the open source tools didn't go after Windows, at least at a very minor level. And they've all flooded in since PowerShell came in. for the same reason, because PowerShell now gives you that same seriously deep level of scripting capability that you have for the Linux, that the people in Linux are used to, the people in Unix are used to, even the people on the mainframe are used to.
Right.
This very deep level of being able to automate everything. For some reason, Microsoft is being really slow to let you automate some things, which is mind-boggling to those of us working with them. You have this great tool. They've got a Ferrari, but for some reason they only want to drive at 40 miles an hour. I'm not really sure why, but they're getting better with each release. And that's good and bad. The problem with it is that means with each release, you've now got a whole bunch of tools that aren't backwards compatible because they weren't there in the previous versions. So over time, by probably 2014 or 15, whatever the next release of the next major release of the Windows Server stuff, it will be that way.
Right.
And a big part of that, or where a lot of that I think comes from, is the fact that they're trying to do Azure, and they realized they couldn't do Azure if everybody has to be GUI clicking lamers, you can't do it.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize, I mean, even people in the business, even people that just do Windows Server administration, deployment administration, I don't think they realize. And this, I mean, PowerShell has been out for a couple versions, I think 2 versions, maybe 3 versions. But the big, huge, monumental shift to me in Microsoft is Windows Server 2012 is the first operating system you can genuinely install, not have a GUI interface at all, since DOS 5.0. That was, I mean, since the advent of Windows 3.1.1 for workgroups was the last one you could genuinely get away from the GUI completely 100%. But ever since Windows 95, basically, you have not been able to install a GUI-less version of a Microsoft operating system. And they're now coming back to that. And that, to me, is the core to getting this fine granularity ability of control without having a GUI to click through. I know a couple people who their 9 to 5 is PowerShell, and they said quite literally, almost everything you can think of, there's a way to do it in PowerShell, and the online groups where they share PowerShell scripts, they said have exploded in like the last year and a half to 10 years, that really make it much easier, they said, to get over that initial learning curve of how to do stuff in PowerShell. But I don't want to say it's the bash shell on Windows because people take that as a big insult, but it's kind of like the bash shell on Windows.
I think that's underselling it, but yeah, I mean, PowerShell has the ability to pull in pretty much anything from the .NET framework and use it. So you can use any of the .NET stuff there. So it's a little bit more powerful than just Bash, because with Bash you would have to call out to another language, Python, Perl, to do those deeper things. But yeah, they just released version 4 of PowerShell. Version 4 of PowerShell finally adds the ability to do really difficult things like configure DNS servers in DHCP, which for some reason wasn't in version 2. That should have been really obvious, or was really obvious to all of us. But it's got ways to work around that, just like you could in a Bash shell script. You can run commands. But those commands, and the reason why PowerShell and things like Python and Perl on the Linux side are better for scripting, is there's a lot more error checking that you can do, and capture and logic that you can put around those captures. So if something doesn't work, you can execute a different line of thinking to fix it if you can, and you can script around problems or stop. Just stop and say, there's a problem, I don't know how to fix it, and let a human look at it. And that was just coming around. But on your point about the servers, so 2012 was the first one that by default, actually, and not just it does, but by default, Windows 2012 installs without the GUI. I wrote a post on DevOpsMastery.com, which we'll put a link to in the show note, where I basically said, in 5 years, if you can't script and you work in IT, you're probably going to have a hard time changing jobs. Because all the versions, all the GUI versions will be gone. 2012 will be at the 5-year point in 5 years, obviously. Or
Right.
6. Well, it'll be at the 7-year point. And so that'll mean everything from that point forward will probably be that way. There's a lot of hints that the next version of Windows will not even have a GUI option. So 2012, you can still install the GUI back if you want it.
Right.
But the next version, there's a lot of hints from Microsoft that they're not even gonna. Everything's gonna be PowerShell.
Right. And to be honest, I'm okay with that because in 2012, there's 3 versions you can install, I believe. There's the complete GUI-less version. There's a complete GUI version, and then there's one in the middle. And what Chad Wollenberg said to me, and I didn't realize this, if you install that mid-tier version and open up your task manager, what you'll see is everything you're clicking, everything you're doing is actually initiating PowerShell scripts themselves. So
Correct.
while it is a GUI, it's essentially a PowerScript-driven GUI.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, also correct me if I'm wrong, because I've never actually tried this, but I was told one of the biggest benefits to Microsoft doing the non-GUI type server installation is there's a big security advantage because there's a lot less things loading, a lot less dependencies, a lot less libraries, a lot less everything. So less should be more secure by default. But what you can do is you can install, let's say, 20 GUI-less servers, have one master GUI server, but you can actually, from that one server, connect to those other GUI-less servers and administrate them from your GUI server, just like you're on that, just like it's a real GUI interface on that server.
Yes. A lot of it is web service based, and it's all secured with SSL and other stuff to make sure that those connections are secure. But yeah, that's actually the recommended approach, is to have one, maybe 2 of those GUI type servers that can give you a control point for the other servers in the environment. But the other thing that you're kind of skipping, I don't know if you're avoiding it or not, but the other benefit to them not putting that GUI on there, if you run it on the non-GUI, you lose about half the memory for the base OS and about half the disk space.
Oh, wow.
Okay, because those GUI parts take up a lot of disk space. Now, as soon as that doesn't mean that it's gone, because Microsoft wants to protect you from yourself, so you can always, all the code is still there, but there isn't an uncompressed copy of it there. It's all compressed in CAD files.
Gotcha.
Because you can switch between them if you need to.
Gotcha. And to me, I keep thinking that ability in 2012 is supposed to be a stepping stone training enhancement of, okay, now you can do this now, but like you're saying in future server versions, to me, they shouldn't have a GUI. And I think it will, like you said, completely change the industry, completely change the talent that you have to have in order to be a good server admin, I'll say.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, this 2012 release was the shot across the bow, saying you better start learning this. It's just not optional.
Very cool.
And it will in the end make everything better, because it'll be super easy for you to take your PowerShell scripts and just point them at Azure and do the exact same thing, because it'll react the same way, it'll act the same way. Or if you're not a fan of running everything Microsoft and you want to run stuff on AWS, you should be able to point those same scripts at Windows servers on AWS, and Bob's your uncle, there you go. Run the scripts over there. And they should, assuming that you've written your scripts correctly, should work exactly the same way. And that takes a lot of testing and planning, but it's easy to do.
Very cool. Now, here's, I think, the wild card question that you can't answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So right now I'm going to say there's 2 major paths of DevOps type development, and it's really, are you going to be in the Linux world or the Windows world? Because there's different scripting languages, there's different tools available to you, different interfaces kind of thing between the OSs. Do you see there ever actually being a single bridging DevOps tool that you could use, and let's say in your DevOps path, start on a Linux server, bounce to a Windows server, go to a Linux server, but the code you enter is um, let's just say non-bias, and then the tool itself determines what type of OS it is, so then it changes the script depending on that?
Actually, it is a question I can answer because if you go look at the documentation on Chef, on Puppet, and on SaltStack, that is the ultimate goal. That is
Oh,
their dream state right now. They want to get to the point where all so that we can have a developer say, I want a system with uh, Apache on it, and I'm just using all open source stuff just to make life
right.
easier. Apache on it, 0MQ, and a MySQL database. And they don't care what OS it runs on. They want those three things there. And then the systems should be able to, through a system of rules, determine for that grouping of software what's the most efficient, or what has your company spent the most time making efficient the distribution that it should be running on, whether that's Windows. I'll include Windows as a distribution. So like
Yeah.
whatever OS type, Windows, any of the Linux distributions, Solaris if that's what you want, or mainframe, and then it will be able to, through a series of business rules, make those decisions, and then deploy it to wherever is best. And that's why they're doing all these layers of abstractions. And as you start to learn how to use Chef and Puppet and SaltStack, they all do this abstraction to try to make it less about what you're running it on and more about what you're trying to run.
That
So
is
what type of
that
configurations you want.
that to me is awesome because that should be the goal. The goal should be, I know how to get processes done. It shouldn't have to rely on someone being an expert on one given platform, whether it be Azure or you know cloud stack or Rackspace or Linux or anything. It's just an expert at using this tool to get this process complete. Now, a couple of the things you said during the show, I see. I don't want to say relation. I'll say relationship. To me, there's something similar with the methods, the logic, and the practices between DevOps and, dare I say, cloud, in the sense of you want certain things to be automated, you want certain things to be flexible, and you want to be able to have distributed services. I think I just keep relating the two, and I don't know if there actually is a connection or not, but they seem to be mirroring themselves in some way.
Cloud is probably more influenced by DevOps than DevOps is influenced by cloud.
Okay, hold on. I
So,
gotta wait a minute. Say that again.
okay, so the cloud is more influenced by the DevOps way of doing things and thinking than the other way around. The
Okay.
cloud exists to make DevOps easier. That makes more sense. Um, because, well, let's take Netflix as an example. If you go out and look at, there's about 20 or 30 different videos of different people in ops and development at Netflix that talk about how they do their deployments.
Hmm.
If you go look for a tool called Asgard, the guy that developed Asgard actually talks pretty in-depthly when he's demoing it about how they deploy applications. Netflix deploys 200, 300 servers at once in Amazon's web services and then flips over to them once they've gone through all their testing. And that becomes the new production.
Hmm.
Um, they couldn't really do that with physical servers. Just the manpower to just rack all those servers would be immense. So doing it with some type of virtualization is kind of key to get to that level of abstraction.
Right.
And so it makes it easier. At the same time, I believe it's Etsy runs everything on bare metal.
Hmm.
So they're doing everything with real hardware, and they're doing all their stuff. I forget how many they do a week. I think they're up to 20 or 30 deployments a week.
Wow.
Okay, and their deployments are very small. They're very well-known units of work that they're pushing out. And there are certain days that the DBAs do changes, that others, there's blocked out days for different groups that have to do something that could affect an application if it's not done right. Um, and they do everything they can, and then they have all kinds of metrics to see what kind of speed and all this other stuff is happening on it. But they do most of their stuff on bare metal, and just for no other reason than they all like bare metal. And they have the money, they have the resources, they have the space, so they do it.
Yeah, do it.
And it works amazingly well. The automation that they have built around it, and John Alsop, who is credited with the term DevOps, is one of their leaders. So, they're very focused on doing it.
How convenient.
Yeah. One of the big things we didn't really talk about with DevOps, though, that I don't want to forget about is, and this is a really hard thing for most companies, so you have to get to a blameless state in your IT. So you have to stop doing the blame game whenever a problem happens and work to resolution. And I think that's one of the things, we talked a little bit about communication at the beginning, but I think that's one of the things that everybody who's listening to this, you need to think about that too. You got to get to a blameless state, because all these tools can make, they don't make you a better admin, they just make you work a lot faster. And the greatest thing about my scripts when we were writing them is, hey, we could make a server mess up in record time. I could crash an entire environment in seconds, thanks to my scripting.
Very cool.
So, you just have to kind of get out of that blame game and go, I don't care whose fault it is, let's solve the problem, and just get everybody to that problem-solving phase.
Well, and I'm going to guess this also has to happen. Just hypothetically, let's just say I knew a place that employed technical people too. My also assumption is it's literally a maturing of the entire economy, the entire morale of the staff in open talking to solutions getting done, not blaming, but also people have to get out of a mentality, I'm guessing, of firefighting and get into a mindset of producing things, doing things in such a fashion that's making everything else more efficient and not causing problems. The thing I like about automation is it leaves nothing to chance. If something that's automated in the right way, and I'm gonna phrase this very carefully. If you automate things in the right way, you are basically assured if something isn't working, it's not your automation. It has to be something else. I did a stuff, I'll just put it that way. On a Windows box, reading a stored procedure, then I'm using Windows versions of wget, Windows versions of I'm using two Linux utilities. I can't remember what the other one is. wget, and I'm scraping a stored procedure, putting it on a ASP file, taking an ASP file, saving it as an HTML file, taking the HTML file, pushing it to a public-facing web server. Okay, and someone said to me, "Well, this isn't working." Hard. Well, it's just one of the things that once you map it out in your head, it isn't hard. It's quick to get done. It's just making it look right. And then every time in the last 6 years when someone said something's not working right, I turn around and tell them, well, get away from me, because it's not my stuff. Because if it was my stuff, this wouldn't be happening. You wouldn't see bad data. You would see nothing. Nothing. It wouldn't work at all,
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I have my own little anecdote for that. So when I got to this insurance company that I worked for, that you can go look at my profile for it and see what it's called. But when I got there, the procedure for deploying the application was 27 pages long and included touching, I think we counted 150 files to change things as we moved between environments.
My goodness.
So first round was just writing, one of my coworkers was an awk master, and he just wrote awk scripts to change all of those files for us, and so that got rid of probably 15 of the pages. And then the next thing we did was to actually write real automation around it to insert those settings so that we didn't have to, what we were changing were configuration files which could have changed at any update and would have broke all of our scripts. So we were writing stuff to use APIs instead of using configuration files. But it took, once we started doing even just the first part of the automation, just doing the file substitutions, but that helped. But we still had all kinds, it was very error prone because there was just so much to do, and it just took a while to work it out.
Right.
But when we did the second ones and we started using the APIs, it very much got to the point where if it worked in dev, it'll work in test, it'll work in staging, and it'll work in production. And there is no question about that. If the setting is wrong, it's wrong in all the places.
Right.
Except for passwords. But, other than passwords, it's wrong in all the places. And that reduced the stress level for my team. It reduced the stress level for the developers. Everybody was extremely confident. And in a few situations that actually ended up backfiring because we had put new scripting in, hadn't really vetted that it was doing everything the way it was supposed to, because this was the first run in production. And a couple of times, even the developers were arguing it can't be the configuration because this worked everywhere else. And so when you get past the point where now everybody's arguing it can't be the configuration because configuration, and we checked the configuration files, and developers would look at the configuration files, and we would say, do we all agree this is the right configuration file? Yes. Okay, move on. And we all agreed that was right, and it turned out that the script was just not working right in the production environment. And it was like, oh, nope, we actually do have a mistake. We'll fix it. And then we fixed it in the scripts, and we never had that problem again. It's that iteration thing. But yeah, just like you were talking about, it's once you get it there and once you've got the automation working, it's a beautiful thing, and it rarely breaks.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking. Initial first 3 months in getting into the DevOps mentality is going to be a lot of I'll just say nonsensical hair pulling out of why isn't this, why is that, how come kind of thing, where you're just going to have to basically learn the nuances of your environment, your domain, your switches, your routers, your servers, what is allowed, what isn't allowed. Does our security policy have to change to enable this, to block that? And it's really, I don't want to say a hard bit of learning, but it's a learning process that once you get past a certain part, that's when you can literally just, be stacking bricks all day and getting things done.
Yes, I agree with most of what you said. But having implemented this in multiple environments and coming in where they had no culture to do this and trying to implement that culture, I will warn everybody that's listening, the thing that you do to make this work is that you bite off very small chunks and you solve the simplest problems first. And simplest doesn't mean the simplest necessarily to script, but go through a little game with yourself. I just talked about this in an upcoming DevOps Mastery podcast that we recorded the other day. Focus on what things you're spending the most time doing so that you can free up time to do more scripting. What things are repeatedly a problem. Right. So things like disks filling up because of logs or because of files or something else that everybody knows, okay, all you do is log in and delete those files. But every time you have to stop and do that, that's scripting time you're not getting. So things that you can do to free yourself up to have more time to write more scripts. And then it snowballs. So if you take these little chunks and then you can build these little chunks into bigger chunks, and then at some point everybody starts to realize, wow, this scripting thing is a really good idea. And then you can go to management and say, like we did in the last version before I left that insurance company, we spent 9 months and we rewrote the automation from tip to tail. And when we did that, we took all the learning that we had, added that in. Plus we learned new things while we were doing that. We added that in. We made the automation a framework so that we could add new stuff in as we needed it. But of the 2,800 screens in WebSphere, we think we only automated about 500. Gotcha. We didn't worry about the other 2,300 because we weren't using them. So don't waste your time on it, that kind of thing. So just kind of focus on what you need, just like a lean startup mentality, but for doing this DevOps thing. Lean startup, you build the minimum viable product, build your minimum viable scripting, and then just keep adding to it. And it'll help you get everything done faster in the long run, but it's going to seem painful at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because you're going to want to do more. And it's like, no, just stick with it. Stick with the path. Do it slow, do it steady, let it build. give yourself more and more time to do that automation, and that's how you're going to get there. And do the collaboration too, because some of it's going to be, you got to talk to developers and get everybody on board about what the goal is, with the changes that they want to do versus the changes you want to do. How can you get them to mesh together? Where can you both go, wow, we both have a stupid idea. Let's throw that stupid idea and come up with this new idea, which is so much better than what we both were trying to do, and move forward. And those are the great conversations, and it gets really fun at that point because everybody's having fun trying to solve problems, and who can come up with the best solution is the goal, and that's what everybody's trying for. And you'll have your arguments about what the best is, but it's okay.
Yeah, I'll say this seems to me a lot to have the same sayings from old COBOL assembly programming methods, which is garbage in, garbage out. If you take the time to do your script building and your building of the DevOps process in the beginning right, the payoff, granted, it's a lot of time spent in the very beginning, but the payoff is great and grand. And I'm not going to lie. When I started listening to you, I instantaneously thought, I need to get a job doing DevOps. I should have a job doing DevOps because I was doing low-level kindergarten, I'll say, DevOps on my desk. When I was in help desk, I would literally take the time to make auto hotkey scripts for the things that would come over the help desk over and over again, to where quite literally I would have it to where someone would call on the help desk, I would instantaneously look at it, diagnose, say, well, it's this issue. I would double-click an exe on my desktop. I would type in the PC tag number. I would hit enter, and it would automatically launch Active Directory users and computers. It would automatically do a search. It would automatically do a find. It would automatically select it. It would automatically right-click. It would automatically do all this kind of stuff. And I would just sit there with my arms crossed for like 30 seconds. And then I would wait. And then my Outlook would pop up, and then my email would start. And then it would type out all the email. And then I would just go and put in the user's name and say, your issue is resolved. And I would hold down Control and hit send, to where I didn't have to do anything. I had these little snippets of code that would literally do all of my standard processing work. And because I didn't have to do it, I was confident in its stability and accuracy, because computers don't make mistakes. Computers just do what you tell them.
Correct. Oh yeah, I mean, and that's why I said, you were talking about being surprised that we do that with the Windows XP to 7 or 8 migrations. That's the reason why we do it, is the exact same thing. It's consistent. We can hire those less skilled people, put them on this, give them some training wheels, because this script isn't going to make a mistake. Now, the script may encounter something we didn't plan for. That happens, and that's what they're standing there to look at. So, call out and say, hey, wait, why didn't this work? And this is where it stopped. And then, more skilled people can go in and help. It definitely is that. It's that at the beginning, but it's more than that. If you really want it to be DevOps, if you really want it to be powerful and corporate changing, it's got to go beyond just you scripting in your own little circle. You have to start integrating with everybody else. And that includes the business and getting the business's input on what the goals of the business are. And I find that for all the marketing pitch that the businesses can do outside the company, they seem to have a really poor track record of doing it inside the company. And I'm sure it's the same for government. But explaining what the goals of the organization are seems to be really hard for people when they're talking to the people that they work with, because they all assume that they all have the same knowledge that they do.
Exactly.
And that also comes into that conversation between ops people and developers. Both sides assume that because you're a technical person, the person on the other side understands everything you're saying. And that's not necessarily true. I've met more than a few developers that can't even figure out how to change or set a static IP address on their machines. I've been developers for 15 years, and I'm going, how do you develop code and you can't figure out how to set a static IP address?
Yeah. We have developers that don't own computers at their house, and they can't attach Word documents to emails.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know how it's possible. It seems, I don't know, implausible.
And there's some developers listening to this right now going, oh, you guys are full of it. You don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, no.
No.
And there's
No.
more than a few operations people, especially Windows administrators, who have no concept of how a program works at an internal low-level part too. So it's not like it's a one-sided thing. Right. And developers sit there and look at them and go, what do you mean you don't understand how to do an algorithm?
Right. Well, yeah, you have server admins that can't comprehend that when you install a .NET application into IIS, you have to make sure that you enable the application pool. What are you talking about? What the hell is that? I have to do what? Yeah, there's just a lot of people take for granted the other side knows more than they actually know. And I think it's just human nature.
Right. We all, don't want to think that we know more than other people to a point.
Right. So. Not thank you enough for coming on. I'm not going to lie. If anyone is interested in DevOps, I'm going to say in my opinion, the easiest way to learn about a lot of things about DevOps is to go listen to Brian's podcast, DevOpsMastery.com. And I think it's pretty safe to say that tools like Chef, SaltStack, and tools like that are only going to become more and more popular and powerful and in need as time goes on.
Oh yeah, they're definitely the things to learn. If you're looking for something new to learn, pick any of them up. Because once you've learned one, learning the others is easy. It's getting past the learning curve on the first one and understanding that you don't have to write all those curl scripts or wgets or any of that. That you just say, go get this, and it goes and gets it. You have to, or go get it from this file share, whatever that is, whatever it is for you.
Very cool, very cool. Well, Brian, I definitely thank you very much for your time. This was really cool, really enlightening. And I'm not going to lie, I might be asking you to come on again in a couple weeks just to talk a little bit more about some stuff. This is really, in my humble opinion, some of the most eye-opening discussions I've had here in recent memory.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on the show, and sure, I'll come back anytime you want me. I don't do any podcasts on Wednesday nights, so that works for me.
Very cool. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone for their support. Thank everyone who uses podnuts.com/Amazon. I want to thank everyone who posts tweets about us, sends us emails. I will say I'm going to ask people when they send in emails to be very very poignant in do they want this read on a show or not, because sometimes I'm not clear and I much rather side on caution. I don't read stuff unless I'm positive it wants to be read. And I'll say, don't forget, people, reddit.com/r/podnuts. We are there. We are doing what we can to work our way into the Reddit culture, and so far I'm having a lot of fun with it. And with that, I will talk to everybody in a fortnight. Okay, good. And it's stopping your Audacity.
I'm stopping my Audacity now.
Yeah, then I just asked you to delete everything before that one marker. I had a lot more noise coming through my mic than I normally have. I don't know what the hell changed. Something changed.
You want the whole AEP project, right?
If you want, you can just export in OGG quality 10. That's just so it's not, a huge, ridiculous amount of data. Okay, as soon as this thing starts working.
Yeah, I'm going to be on Arrested DevOps, and I've already decided that are you going to do another? Oh, you don't know yet. Are you going to try to do something